My daughter stood before the judge with tears streaming down her face, clutching a tablet loaded with videos that showed me wandering confused through grocery store aisles, forgetting names, leaving the stove on, getting lost in my own neighborhood. The judge watched with growing concern as each clip played, her expression shifting from neutral to sympathetic. What the court didn't know was that every single frame had been carefully edited, strategically cut, and deliberately manipulated to make me look like a woman whose mind was slipping away. My name is Patricia, I'm 72 years old, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to steal my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It started 18 months ago when my daughter Vanessa moved back home after her divorce. She was 35, devastated, and according to her, completely broke. Her husband had left her for someone younger, taken most of their assets through what she claimed was a corrupt legal system, and left her with nothing but debt and heartbreak. As her mother, what else could I do but open my doors and my heart? She arrived on a rainy October evening with 3 suitcases, a laptop, and what I thought was gratitude in her eyes. My home in Riverside was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that my late husband Gerald and I had purchased 40 years ago. After Gerald passed 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the house had felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that sometimes suffocated me in the middle of the night. Having Vanessa there seemed like it might breathe new life into the place. We could be companions for each other, I thought. We could heal together from our respective losses. The first few weeks were pleasant enough. Vanessa helped with household chores, cooked dinner occasionally, and we'd spend evenings watching old movies that reminded us both of happier times. She talked about getting back on her feet, finding a new job, maybe taking some online courses to update her skills. She'd worked in marketing before her marriage, and she seemed eager to rebuild her career. I encouraged her, offered to help financially if she needed it for classes or professional development. She was my only child, after all, and seeing her so broken tore at my heart. But somewhere around the 3rd month, things began to shift in ways so subtle I almost didn't notice. Vanessa started making comments about my memory. Little things at first. Mom, you already told me that story yesterday. Are you sure you turned off the coffee maker? I had to do it for you this morning. Did you forget we had plans today? I specifically reminded you last night. Each comment came wrapped in concern, delivered with a gentle touch on my arm and worried eyes that made me question myself rather than her. I started second-guessing everything. Had I told her that story before? Maybe I was becoming forgetful. I was 72 after all. Perhaps this was just the natural progression of aging that everyone talked about but nobody wanted to acknowledge. The doubts crept in slowly, like water seeping through a crack in a foundation, barely noticeable until suddenly everything felt unstable. Vanessa began accompanying me everywhere. To the grocery store, to doctor's appointments, to my weekly book club meetings. She insisted it was because she enjoyed spending time with me, because she wanted to help, because she worried about me driving alone at my age. I appreciated the attention at first. After years of loneliness following Gerald's death, having my daughter want to be near me felt like a gift. I didn't realize I was being monitored. She also started filming everything. Her phone was constantly out, recording what she called precious family moments. Making breakfast together, working in the garden, me reading on the porch. Just capturing memories, Mom. Life goes by so fast. I want to remember these times with you. It seemed sweet. How could I object to my daughter wanting to preserve our time together? I smiled for her camera, posed when she asked, let her document our daily lives without understanding what she was really doing. Around the 5-month mark, Vanessa brought up the idea of me signing some papers. Just updated power of attorney documents, she explained. After Dad died, you never got around to updating these things. If something happened to you, I'd have no legal authority to help you. It's just a precaution, Mom. Smart planning. She had them all printed out, professional-looking documents with official seals and legal language that made my head spin when I tried to read through them. I hesitated. Something about the urgency in her voice didn't sit right with me. Why now? Why the sudden rush? But Vanessa had an answer for everything. Because I love you and want to protect you. Because we never know what tomorrow brings. Because didn't I learn anything from how complicated things got when Dad died without proper planning? The guilt was effective. I signed some of the documents but told her I wanted my attorney to review the others first. Her smile tightened just slightly, a brief flash of something cold in her eyes before the warmth returned. Of course, Mom. Whatever makes you comfortable. That's when the incidents started escalating. I would find things moved from where I'd left them. My car keys disappearing and then turning up in strange places like the refrigerator or the bathroom cabinet. My purse hidden in the garage. My reading glasses that I always kept on my bedside table suddenly appearing in the kitchen drawer. Each time, Vanessa would find them and bring them to me with that same concerned expression. Mom, are you feeling okay? This is the third time this week you've misplaced something important. But I hadn't misplaced them. I was certain of it. I had specific places for my belongings, habits developed over decades of living in the same house. My keys always went on the hook by the door. My purse always sat on the bench in the hallway. My glasses always stayed on my nightstand. Yet there they were, showing up in impossible locations, making me doubt my own sanity. Was I losing my mind? Was this how it started for people with dementia? Would I even know if my brain was failing me? The self-doubt was crippling. I started moving through my own home like a stranger, uncertain about everything, questioning every action and every memory. Vanessa was always there to witness my confusion, to document my distress with her ever-present phone, to offer comfort that somehow felt more like observation. Don't worry, Mom. We'll figure this out together. Maybe we should get you checked out by a doctor. Have you considered that you might need some help managing things? My friends from book club started noticing changes too, but not in me. In Vanessa. Margaret, who'd known me for 20 years, pulled me aside one afternoon. Patricia, is everything all right at home? Vanessa seems very controlling. She barely lets you speak for yourself anymore. I defended my daughter automatically, making excuses about her being protective, about her going through a difficult time, about how grateful I was for her help. But Margaret's words planted a seed of awareness that began to grow. I started paying closer attention, noticing how Vanessa answered questions directed at me, how she corrected me when I spoke, claiming I was confused about dates or details, how she'd taken over managing my medications, my appointments, my daily schedule, how she'd somehow gained access to my bank accounts under the guise of helping me pay bills, how I'd become increasingly isolated, with fewer visits from friends and neighbors because Vanessa always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I woke up to find Vanessa in my bedroom, going through the drawers of my dresser. When I asked what she was doing, she didn't even startle. Just turned to me with that practiced concerned expression and said she was looking for my insurance papers because she'd made me a doctor's appointment for a cognitive assessment. We need to get you evaluated, Mom. Your memory issues are getting worse. I think you might have early-stage Alzheimer's or dementia. We need to know what we're dealing with. Something inside me snapped. I didn't have memory issues. I had a daughter who was systematically gaslighting me, creating evidence of incompetence, and trying to have me declared mentally unfit. The clarity hit me like ice water, shocking and absolute. This wasn't love. This wasn't concern. This was something far more sinister. I told her I didn't want the appointment. I told her to stop going through my things. I told her that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Vanessa's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Then she smiled, that same sweet smile she'd been giving me for months, and said, of course, whatever I wanted. But I could see it in her eyes. I'd become a problem that needed to be handled. That afternoon, while Vanessa was out, I called my attorney, Richard Morrison, who'd been handling my legal affairs since Gerald died. I need to see you immediately, I told him. I think my daughter is trying to steal from me. Richard, who'd known our family for years, didn't dismiss my concerns. He scheduled an appointment for the following day and told me not to sign anything else until we talked. I also called my doctor, Diane Shen, who'd been treating me for routine health matters for the past decade. I scheduled a comprehensive evaluation, but at my own request, not Vanessa's. If there was something wrong with my mind, I wanted to know. But I wanted the truth from a doctor I trusted, not from a daughter who seemed to have her own agenda. That night, Vanessa made dinner and chatted pleasantly about her day, about a job interview she'd had, about maybe looking for her own apartment soon. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. studying me, calculating. I knew then that whatever was coming next wouldn't be pleasant. I just had no idea how far she was willing to go. The next morning I was supposed to meet with Richard at 10. I'd written it down, confirmed it, set an alarm. But when I woke up that morning it was already 11:30. I'd somehow slept through the alarm, through the morning, through my appointment. I felt groggy, disoriented, my mouth dry and my thoughts sluggish. Vanessa brought me coffee and toast in bed, claiming she'd tried to wake me, but I'd been so deeply asleep she'd worried about disturbing me. "You must have really needed the rest, Mom. You've been so stressed lately." I called Richard's office to apologize and reschedule, but his secretary informed me that Vanessa had already called earlier that morning to cancel, claiming I wasn't feeling well. I stared at my phone after the call ended, a sick realization settling in my stomach. Vanessa had somehow known about the appointment.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She'd gone through my phone or my calendar, and she'd made sure I couldn't make it. That evening I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion. But instead of sleeping I lay in bed thinking, planning. I needed help, but I had to be smart about it. Vanessa was clearly monitoring my communications, my movements, my plans. I couldn't trust my phone. I couldn't trust that any appointment I made would actually happen. I needed to find a way to reach the outside world without her knowing. The next day, while Vanessa was in the shower, I took my car keys and left. Just drove away from my own house like I was escaping prison. I went straight to Richard's office without calling ahead, walked in, and asked to see him immediately. The receptionist must have seen something in my face because she ushered me right in despite my not having an appointment. Richard listened to everything. The gaslighting, the missing items, the constant filming, the document she wanted me to sign, the canceled appointment, the way I'd slept through my alarm. He took notes, asked questions, and then said something that terrified me. "Patricia, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse. This is serious. We need to act carefully but quickly." He wanted to review my accounts, my assets, any documents I'd already signed. He wanted to know exactly what Vanessa had access to and what she might be trying to access. We spent 2 hours going through everything. To my horror, I discovered that some of the papers I'd signed months ago had given Vanessa partial access to my bank accounts. She'd already transferred significant sums to her own account, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic bank reviews. $37,000 over 5 months, moved in increments that looked like routine bill payments or cash withdrawals. Richard's face grew grimmer with each revelation. We also discovered that she'd applied for credit cards in my name, run up balances, and made minimum payments to keep me from noticing. She'd taken out a personal loan using my house as collateral. She'd even contacted my insurance company to inquire about the cash value of my life insurance policy and the process for changing beneficiaries. The scope of it was staggering. My own daughter had been systematically looting my finances while simultaneously building a case that I was mentally incompetent. Richard immediately froze my accounts, canceled the fraudulent credit cards, and filed police reports for identity theft and elder abuse. But he warned me that the financial crimes were only part of the problem. If Vanessa has been building evidence that you're mentally incompetent, she might try to file for conservatorship. Those videos she's been taking, the incidents she's been creating and documenting, could all be used to convince a judge that you can't care for yourself. We need to get ahead of this. He advised me to get the cognitive evaluation I'd scheduled with Dr. Chan immediately. Get it on record from a doctor you trust that you're mentally sound. Document everything Vanessa has done. Keep a detailed journal. Save any messages or recordings. Build your own evidence to counter whatever she's preparing. I felt like I was preparing for war against my own child. When I returned home that evening, Vanessa was furious. "Where were you? I've been worried sick. You just disappeared without telling me. You could have gotten lost or hurt. Do you understand how irresponsible that was?" She was playing the role of concerned daughter perfectly, her voice trembling with what anyone else would mistake for genuine fear. But I could see past it now. I could see the anger underneath, the frustration that I'd slipped out of her control even briefly. I told her I'd gone to run errands. She asked which errands. I said I'd gone to the pharmacy and the bank. Her eyes sharpened at the mention of the bank. "What did you need at the bank, Mom? I could have helped you with that. You know how confused you get with financial matters lately. I told her I just needed to check on something, nothing important. The lie sat heavy on my tongue, but I couldn't let her know what I'd discovered. Not yet. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house seemed threatening. I kept thinking about all the months I'd trusted her, all the times I doubted myself instead of questioning her motives. I kept wondering how my daughter, the little girl I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, had turned into someone who could do this to me. Where had I failed? What had I missed in her childhood that allowed her to become this person? The cognitive evaluation with Dr. Chan happened 3 days later. Vanessa tried to insist on coming with me, but I told her firmly that I preferred to go alone. She protested, claiming she needed to be there to provide information about my symptoms, but I held my ground. For the first time in months, I asserted my independence clearly. I'm perfectly capable of speaking to my own doctor, Vanessa. I'll be fine. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't push further. Dr. Chan put me through extensive testing, memory exercises, problem-solving tasks, questions about current events and personal history. She tested my reasoning, my judgment, my ability to manage daily tasks. After 3 hours of evaluation, she delivered her verdict. Patricia, there is absolutely nothing wrong with your cognitive function. Your memory is excellent for your age. Your reasoning is sound. You show no signs whatsoever of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other cognitive impairment. In fact, you scored above average in several categories. Whatever your daughter has been telling you about memory problems, it's simply not supported by any medical evidence. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the anger. I had been gaslit so thoroughly that even with the clarity I'd gained, part of me had still worried that maybe I really was losing my mind. Having a medical professional confirm that I was fine, that there was nothing wrong with me, that Vanessa's concerns were unfounded, gave me the ammunition I needed. Dr. Chen documented everything in my medical records and provided me with a detailed letter summarizing her findings. Keep this safe, she advised. You might need it. I took the letter straight to Richard, who added it to the growing file of evidence we were compiling. He'd also been investigating Vanessa, hiring a private investigator to look into her background and recent activities. What they found made everything worse. Vanessa hadn't been left broke by her divorce. She'd received a substantial settlement, nearly $200,000. But she'd gone through almost all of it in less than a year, spending recklessly on luxury items, trips, and gambling. She was drowning in debt, facing lawsuits from creditors, and had been evicted from 2 apartments for non-payment of rent before moving in with me. She hadn't come home because she needed emotional support. She'd come home because she needed money and had quickly realized that I had assets worth taking. My house was paid off and worth approximately $400,000. I had retirement savings of just over $300,000. I had life insurance with a $200,000 benefit. To Vanessa, I wasn't her mother. I was a retirement plan. The investigator also uncovered something else. Vanessa had been researching conservatorship laws for months before moving in with me. She'd consulted with attorneys about the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent. She joined online forums where people discussed strategies for gaining control over elderly parents' finances. She'd even purchased books about identifying dementia symptoms and documenting cognitive decline. This had never been about helping me or healing from her divorce. This had been a calculated plan from the very beginning. Armed with this information, Richard and I prepared for what we knew was coming. Vanessa wouldn't just accept that I'd frozen the accounts and discovered her theft. She would escalate. She would make her move soon. We just didn't know exactly what form it would take. We didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 weeks after I froze the bank accounts, Vanessa filed a petition for emergency conservatorship. I received the court notification on a Thursday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick envelope of legal documents. My hand shook as I read through the petition, seeing my own daughter's signature at the bottom of page after page of lies. The petitioner claims that Patricia and Morrison, age 72, is suffering from severe cognitive decline including advanced dementia, poses a danger to herself and others, is unable to manage her financial affairs or personal care, and requires immediate intervention for her own safety and well-being. The hearing was scheduled for 10 days later. 10 days to prepare my defense against accusations that I was losing my mind. 10 days before a judge would decide whether I retained control of my own life, or whether my daughter would become my legal guardian with authority over every aspect of my existence. Richard immediately filed a response denying all allegations and requested a full evidentiary hearing, rather than the emergency session Vanessa had asked for. "We need time to present our case properly," he explained. "She's trying to rush this through before anyone can examine her claims too closely." What made everything more disturbing was the evidence Vanessa had submitted with her petition. Page after page of documentation. Photographs of my supposedly misplaced items found in bizarre locations. Timestamps showing I'd missed appointments or gotten dates confused. Screenshots of text messages where I allegedly said things I had no memory of saying. Medical records from doctors I'd never visited claiming I'd been evaluated and found to have significant cognitive impairment. Bills marked as unpaid that Vanessa claimed I'd forgotten to pay, though I'd always been meticulous about my finances. And then there were the videos. Richard and I sat in his office watching them on his laptop, both of us growing more horrified with each clip. There I was in the grocery store, wandering up and down the aisles looking confused and disoriented while Vanessa's voice in the background asked if I needed help finding what I was looking for. There I was standing in my own kitchen staring blankly at the stove, which was on with nothing cooking, while Vanessa rushed in to turn it off and express concern about me burning the house down. There I was getting into my car and then sitting in the driver's seat looking lost and uncertain, unable to remember where I was supposed to be going. There I was at my doctor's office giving completely wrong information about my medications and medical history, while Vanessa gently corrected me. The videos were damning. Anyone watching them would see exactly what Vanessa wanted them to see. An elderly woman whose mind was clearly failing, who couldn't be trusted to care for herself, who desperately needed someone to take over her affairs before she hurt herself or others. Except none of it was real. Or rather, all of it was real footage, but the context had been carefully constructed and then edited to present a false narrative. I remembered that day in the grocery store. Vanessa had sent me to pick up specific items for a recipe she wanted to make, but when I'd gotten there, she'd called and changed the list 3 times, adding items, removing others, telling me to check different aisles. I'd been confused because her instructions kept changing, not because my mind was failing. The video showed me wandering, but it didn't show her on the phone giving contradictory directions. It didn't show my frustration with her, only my apparent disorientation. The kitchen incident with the stove had happened on a morning when I'd put water on to boil for tea, then stepped outside to get the newspaper. I'd been gone less than 3 minutes. But Vanessa's video made it look like I'd turned on the stove, and then wandered away forgetting about it entirely, standing there staring at it blankly until she intervened. The video didn't show that I'd only been outside briefly, didn't show that I'd been on my way back to the kitchen when she started filming. She'd caught me in a moment that looked incriminating but was actually completely innocent. The car incident was perhaps the most manipulated. I'd gotten in my car that day planning to drive to my book club meeting, but I'd sat there for a moment reviewing the discussion questions I needed to prepare. I was thinking, organizing my thoughts, not confused or lost. But Vanessa had filmed me sitting there, and with her narration about how I couldn't remember where I was going, it looked like cognitive failure instead of simple contemplation. The doctor's office video was the most egregious fabrication. I hadn't given wrong information about my medications. The doctor Vanessa had taken me to wasn't even my regular physician. She'd scheduled an appointment with a new doctor without telling me, then fed me incorrect information beforehand about what medications I was supposedly taking. When I'd repeated what she'd told me, naturally it was wrong, because she'd deliberately given me false information. The video showed me looking confused and giving incorrect answers, but it didn't show Vanessa coaching me with wrong information before we went in. Every video had been carefully staged, edited, and presented out of context to support her narrative. She'd been planning this for months, creating evidence, building a case, documenting incidents that she herself had engineered. The sophistication of it was chilling. This wasn't impulsive or opportunistic. This was methodical, calculated manipulation designed to strip me of my autonomy and access to my assets. Richard immediately hired a video forensics expert to analyze the footage. What he found confirmed our suspicions. The videos had been heavily edited. Timestamps had been altered. Audio had been manipulated to remove Vanessa's voice giving contradictory instructions or false information. Sections had been cut out that would have provided context showing I was responding normally to abnormal situations she'd created. The expert prepared a detailed report documenting every manipulation, every edit, every instance where the videos misrepresented reality. We also discovered that the medical records from doctors I'd supposedly visited were fraudulent. Richard contacted each physician's office listed in Vanessa's documentation. None of them had any record of me as a patient. The letterhead was real, stolen from their websites, but the evaluations themselves were complete fabrications. Vanessa had created fake medical reports using real doctors' names and credentials to give her claims legitimacy. That was a crime in itself, medical fraud and forgery, but first we had to win the conservatorship hearing. Meanwhile, life at home had become unbearable. Vanessa knew I'd discovered her theft and fraud. She knew I'd frozen the accounts and filed police reports. She knew her plan was falling apart. But she couldn't leave because she'd put everything into this scheme and had nowhere else to go. Her debt was crushing her. Her creditors were calling constantly. She needed access to my money desperately, and the conservatorship was her last chance to get it. So we lived in the same house, mother and daughter, in a state of Cold War. She still tried to maintain her facade of concern when anyone else was around. If a neighbor stopped by or if we encountered someone we knew at the store, Vanessa would transform into the devoted daughter caring for her ailing mother. She'd put her arm around me, speak to me in that patronizing tone people use with children or the mentally impaired, answer questions on my behalf. It was infuriating but also strategic on her part. She was still building her case, still creating witnesses who would testify that yes, they'd seen Patricia's daughter taking care of her. And yes, Patricia did seem confused and in need of assistance. But when we were alone, the mask came off. She'd make subtle threats about how the judge would believe her evidence, how I'd end up in a nursing home with her controlling every aspect of my life, how I'd lost and just didn't know it yet. She'd move my things again deliberately, no longer trying to hide it, just to prove she could still mess with my head. She'd follow me around the house watching my every move. She'd listen in on my phone calls. She'd go through my room searching for any evidence I might be gathering against her. I started keeping everything important with me at all times. My purse never left my sight. My phone stayed in my pocket. Important documents stayed locked in my car trunk. I changed all my passwords. I stopped eating or drinking anything Vanessa prepared after Richard expressed concern that she might try drugging me to make me appear confused or incapacitated. The level of vigilance required was exhausting. I was constantly on guard in my own home, unable to relax or feel safe. My friends rallied around me when I finally told them what was happening. Margaret came over one afternoon when Vanessa was out, and I broke down explaining everything. She was horrified but not entirely surprised. She'd sensed something was wrong for months. The other women from book club felt the same way when Margaret told them. They'd all noticed how Vanessa controlled our interactions, how she'd isolated me, how I'd seemed increasingly anxious and uncertain. They just assumed I was going through normal aging adjustments and that Vanessa was being helpful. None of them had imagined the truth. They all agreed to testify on my behalf at the hearing. They could provide evidence of my mental clarity, my ability to engage in complex discussions about literature and current events, my normal social functioning. Margaret's husband, who was a retired accountant, volunteered to review my financial records and testify about my competent money management over the years. My neighbor Daniel, who'd known me since we moved to Riverside 40 years ago, offered to speak about my independence and capability. Even my hairdresser, Rosa, who'd been cutting my hair for 15 years, said she'd testify that I'd always been sharp, on time for appointments, and fully coherent during our conversations. Building a support network felt empowering, but it also highlighted how isolated Vanessa had made me. I hadn't realized how much she'd cut me off from my community until I started reaching back out. There were friends I hadn't spoken to in months because Vanessa had made excuses for why I couldn't meet them or had claimed I was too tired for visitors. There were activities I'd stopped attending because Vanessa had convinced me I wasn't up to them anymore. There were parts of my life that had simply disappeared because she'd systematically removed them, while I was too busy doubting myself to notice. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the possible outcomes. If Vanessa won, I'd lose everything. My freedom, my home, my savings, my dignity. I'd be declared incompetent by a court of law. A label that would follow me forever. I'd be placed in a facility somewhere, probably somewhere cheap because Vanessa would want to preserve as much of my money as possible for herself. I'd become exactly what she'd been trying to make me believe I was. A helpless elderly woman with no agency or autonomy. But even if I won, what then? Vanessa was still my daughter. The only child Gerald and I had created together, raised together, loved together. How had it come to this? How had the baby girl I'd nursed and the toddler I'd taught to walk, and the young woman I'd sent off to college become someone who could do this to me? The grief was almost as crushing as the fear. I wasn't just fighting for my independence. I was mourning the loss of my daughter, the loss of the relationship I'd thought we had, the loss of the future I'd imagined we'd share. Morning came too quickly. Richard picked me up at 7 to go over our strategy one final time before the 9 o'clock hearing. Vanessa had already left the house, presumably to meet with her attorney. Richard had reviewed all our evidence multiple times, but he was concerned. Conservatorship cases were notoriously difficult because judges erred on the side of caution when elderly people were involved. Even with all our evidence proving Vanessa's fraud and my competence, there was a chance the judge might order further evaluation or temporary conservatorship while investigations continued. We need to be prepared for any outcome, he warned me. The courthouse was cold and imposing. We arrived early and sat on a bench in the hallway waiting for our case to be called. I watched other families going in and out of courtrooms, wondered what tragedies or conflicts had brought them there. Vanessa arrived with her attorney 20 minutes before our scheduled time. She was dressed conservatively in a navy suit, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked like the picture of a responsible, concerned daughter. When our eyes met across the hallway, she gave me a small sad smile as if she pitied me, as if this whole thing pained her but was necessary for my own good. Her attorney was a woman in her 50s named Diane Casper, who specialized in elder law and conservatorship cases. Richard had warned me about her. She was good, aggressive, and knew how to present compelling cases for conservatorship. She'd won numerous cases involving elderly people with dementia or cognitive decline. She knew exactly what judges wanted to see and hear. We were going up against someone who did this for a living and who believed she was protecting a vulnerable senior from her own failing mind. When our case was finally called, we filed into the courtroom. Judge Helen Bradford presided. A woman in her early 60s with gray hair and a reputation for being thorough and fair but also no nonsense. She didn't tolerate games or wasted time. Richard had said this could work in our favor since we had facts on our side, but it also meant we needed to be precise and compelling from the start. Diane Casper presented Vanessa's case first. She painted a heartbreaking picture of a devoted daughter watching her beloved mother deteriorate mentally, trying desperately to help while Patricia stubbornly refused to acknowledge her decline. She submitted the videos, the photographs, the supposedly medical records, and the testimony of incidents where I'd allegedly endangered myself or others. She called Vanessa to the stand. My daughter sat there looking earnest and emotional, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as she described her concerns about my safety and well-being. She talked about finding me confused and disoriented, about discovering unpaid bills and financial mismanagement, about the stove incidents and the wandering and the memory lapses. She described how worried she was, how much she loved me, how difficult it had been to make the decision to file for conservatorship, but how necessary it seemed for my own protection. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known the truth, even I might have been convinced by her apparent sincerity. The judge listened carefully, occasionally asking questions, watching the video evidence with a concerned expression. When Diane Casper finished presenting her case, things looked bad for me. Based solely on what had been presented, I appeared to be exactly what Vanessa claimed, an elderly woman in serious cognitive decline who was too proud or too confused to accept help. Then it was Richard's turn. He stood up slowly, deliberately, and began by thanking the court for its time and attention. He acknowledged that elder abuse and cognitive decline were serious issues that deserved careful consideration. But then his tone sharpened. However, Your Honor, what we have before us today is not a case of a daughter trying to protect her mother. What we have is a calculated case of elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft disguised as concern. Every piece of evidence Ms. Casper has presented is either manipulated, fabricated, or taken so far out of context as to constitute fraud upon this court. He methodically dismantled Vanessa's case piece by piece. He presented the video forensics report showing how every clip had been edited and manipulated. He showed the judge the original metadata and pointed out where timestamps had been altered, where audio had been removed, where crucial context had been deleted. He played several clips showing the full unedited versions that told completely different stories from Vanessa's edited versions. The grocery store clip that showed Vanessa repeatedly changing her instructions. The kitchen clip that showed me being outside for less than 3 minutes before returning. The car clip showing me reviewing documents rather than looking confused. He presented Dr. Chen's comprehensive evaluation and letter stating, "I had no cognitive impairment." He submitted evidence that the other medical records were forgeries, showing that I'd never been a patient at those offices, and that the evaluations were fraudulent. He called the physicians themselves who testified via video conference that they'd never examined me, and had never written the reports bearing their names. Watching Vanessa's face as her fabricated evidence crumbled was almost satisfying. Almost. Because this was still my daughter, and what I felt was more heartbreak than vindication. Richard then addressed the financial allegations. He presented my bank records going back 5 years showing meticulous financial management. He showed my bills all paid on time. He showed my retirement accounts, properly managed and maintained. Then he presented the evidence of Vanessa's theft, the unauthorized transfers, the fraudulent credit cards, the loan taken against my house. He showed that Vanessa was the one with financial problems, drowning in debt and facing legal action from multiple creditors. He called Margaret to testify about my mental clarity during our book club discussions and social interactions. He called my neighbor Daniel, who spoke about my independence and normal functioning. He called my hairdresser Rosa, who testified about our coherent conversations. He called my longtime physician Dr. Chun, who reiterated her professional opinion that I was mentally sound. One by one, they painted a picture of a competent, capable woman who'd been systematically victimized by her own daughter. But the most powerful moment came when Richard called me to the stand. I was terrified. My hands shook as I placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. But once I started speaking, something shifted inside me. This was my chance to tell my story, to take back my narrative, to refuse the role of victim that Vanessa had tried to force me into. I described how Vanessa had moved in claiming to be broke, when she actually had money from her divorce settlement. I explained how she'd started making comments about my memory, and creating situations that made me doubt myself. I detailed the gaslighting, the items moved deliberately to confuse me, the constant filming, the isolation from my friends. I talked about discovering her theft and fraud. I explained how I'd found her research on conservatorship laws, and realized this had been planned from the beginning. The hardest part was talking about my feelings. About the betrayal of realizing my own daughter saw me not as a person but as an asset to be exploited. About the grief of losing the relationship I'd thought we had. About the fear of what might have happened if I hadn't discovered the truth in time. My voice broke several times. Tears ran down my face. But I kept going because this was too important to let emotion stop me from speaking truth. Diane Casper cross-examined me aggressively, trying to poke holes in my testimony, trying to suggest I was confused about events or misremembering situations. But I held firm. I had dates, times, and specific details. I had evidence to support everything I said. Richard had prepared me well. Every attempt to rattle me or make me appear confused failed because I wasn't confused. I was clear, angry, and determined. When it was Diane's turn to present rebuttal, she focused on arguing that even if some of Vanessa's evidence was flawed, that didn't mean Patricia wasn't experiencing cognitive decline. She suggested that perhaps I was having good days and bad days, that the court evaluation showed me at my best while Vanessa's videos captured me at my worst. She argued that erring on the side of caution was appropriate given my age, and the serious consequences of leaving someone vulnerable without protection. But Richard countered by pointing out that there was no credible evidence of cognitive decline. Not one legitimate medical professional had found any impairment. Not one person who knew me well had observed any concerning changes except those created and documented by Vanessa. The only evidence of decline came from manipulated videos and forged documents, which themselves constituted crimes. Protecting someone from genuine cognitive decline is appropriate, he argued. But stripping a competent adult of her rights based on fabricated evidence is unconscionable and illegal. Judge Bradford called a recess to review all the evidence and consider the testimony. Those 90 minutes felt like the longest of my life. Richard, Margaret, and I sat in the hallway waiting. Vanessa and her attorney sat at the opposite end, not looking at us. I tried to read the judge's expression when she'd called the recess, tried to guess which way she was leaning, but her face had been carefully neutral. When we were finally called back in, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone in the courtroom must be able to hear it. Judge Bradford looked at both parties, then down. I have reviewed all the evidence presented and heard all the testimony. This is one of the most disturbing cases I've encountered in my years on the bench. What we have here is not a case of cognitive decline requiring intervention. What we have is a clear case of elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft perpetrated by a daughter against her mother. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Patricia Morrison is mentally competent, financially responsible, and fully capable of managing her own affairs. The petition for conservatorship is denied in its entirety. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt dizzy. Richard squeezed my hand. Margaret, sitting behind us in the gallery, let out a small sound of triumph. But Judge Bradford wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution. The evidence presented shows multiple crimes including elder abuse, theft, fraud, forgery, and fraud upon this court. I am issuing an immediate restraining order prohibiting Vanessa Morrison from contact with Patricia Morrison or from coming within 500 feet of her residence. And I am ordering that Patricia Morrison be provided with copies of all evidence submitted in this case for her use in any civil proceedings she may choose to pursue. The judge's gaze fixed on Vanessa, who had gone pale. Ms. Morrison, what you have done to your mother is reprehensible. You have betrayed her trust, stolen her money, and attempted to rob her of her freedom and dignity. The manipulated evidence you presented to this court was not only morally wrong but legally criminal. You should be ashamed of yourself, though based on your actions, I suspect shame is not something you're capable of feeling. This court session is adjourned. The gavel came down with finality. I'd won. I was free. Vanessa couldn't touch me anymore. But as I watched her stand up and walk out of the courtroom, her shoulders rigid and her face expressionless, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Victory, yes. Relief, absolutely. But also profound sadness. Because winning this battle meant losing my daughter. The woman who walked out of that courtroom was a stranger wearing my daughter's face, and the real Vanessa, if she'd ever existed, was gone. The restraining order went into effect immediately. 2 police officers escorted Vanessa back to my house to collect her belongings under supervision. I stayed with Margaret during the removal, unable to face watching my daughter pack up and leave under such circumstances. Richard handled everything, ensuring she took only what belonged to her and nothing more. She was gone within 3 hours, and I returned to a house that felt simultaneously emptier and lighter than it had in 18 months. The criminal investigation moved quickly. The district attorney assigned a prosecutor who specialized in elder abuse cases, a sharp woman named Kelly Rodriguez who treated the case with the seriousness it deserved. The evidence was overwhelming. Vanessa's manipulated videos, the forged medical documents, the financial theft, the fraudulent credit cards, the unauthorized loan, everything documented and undeniable. Within 6 weeks, she was formally charged with multiple felonies including elder abuse, grand theft, identity theft, fraud, and forgery. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Kelly refused to offer anything lenient. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate act by someone in crisis. This was months of calculated abuse and theft targeting a vulnerable family member. The message needed to be clear that such behavior would be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Vanessa eventually accepted a plea agreement that included 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, and restitution of all stolen funds plus damages. It wasn't as much time as Kelly wanted, but it was something. I attended the sentencing hearing. I debated whether to go, whether I could handle seeing her again, whether it would help or hurt my healing process. But ultimately I decided I needed to be there, needed to see this through to the end. Vanessa stood before the judge looking smaller, somehow diminished. When given the opportunity to address the court, she offered what sounded like a rehearsed apology that mentioned her difficult divorce, her financial stress, her poor judgment. She claimed she'd convinced herself she was actually helping me, that she'd rationalized her actions as being in my best interest. She said she was sorry, but she never looked at me. Not once during the entire hearing did her eyes meet mine. And that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't actually sorry for what she'd done to me. She was sorry she'd been caught. Sorry she was facing consequences. Sorry her plan had failed. The remorse was performative. Another manipulation aimed at reducing her sentence. The judge saw through it too, I think. When she handed down the sentence, she specifically noted that genuine remorse required acknowledging the harm done, not just expressing regret about outcomes. The house felt strange after everything settled. I'd lived there for 40 years, raised Vanessa there, built a life with Gerald there. But Vanessa's presence had poisoned it somehow. Every room held memories of her manipulation, her surveillance, her calculated cruelty. I considered selling it, starting fresh somewhere new where I wouldn't constantly be reminded of what had happened. But that felt like letting her win in a different way, like letting her drive me from my own home. So instead I reclaimed it. I redecorated Vanessa's old bedroom, turning it into a proper guest room with no traces of her left behind. I changed the kitchen layout slightly, replacing the counters and cabinets she'd filmed me at countless times. I updated the living room furniture, bought new curtains, painted several walls in colors I'd always wanted but Gerald had never liked. Slowly, methodically, I made the house mine again rather than just the place where terrible things had happened to me. My friends were incredible during the recovery process. Margaret checked on me daily, sometimes just calling to chat, sometimes stopping by with dinner or inviting me to lunch. The book club rallied around me, making sure I was included in every activity, never treating me like I was fragile or damaged. Daniel and his wife started a tradition of Friday evening cocktails on their porch where neighbors would gather, and they always made sure I felt welcome. Rosa gave me a completely new hairstyle, something fresher and more modern, telling me it was time for a change that reflected the strong woman I'd proven myself to be. But the emotional recovery was harder than the practical aspects. I had nightmares about conservatorship hearings where the judge ruled differently, where I lost everything and ended up institutionalized while Vanessa spent my money. I had periods of intense anger where I'd find myself furious at her betrayal, furious at myself for not seeing it sooner, furious at a system that allowed such abuse to happen. I had moments of profound grief, mourning not just the daughter I'd lost, but the relationship I'd thought we had that apparently never existed. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma and elder abuse. Dr. Sarah Matthews helped me work through the complicated feelings of loving someone who'd hurt me so deliberately, of grieving a relationship while simultaneously being relieved it was over. She helped me understand that what Vanessa had done wasn't my fault, that there were no warning signs I should have caught earlier because Vanessa had been deliberately deceptive. She helped me recognize that my instinct to trust my daughter wasn't naivety. It was normal human connection that Vanessa had exploited. One of the hardest things was dealing with other people's reactions. Some people were supportive and understanding, but others made thoughtless comments. Well, surely she didn't mean real harm. Family is complicated. Maybe if you'd been more aware of your vulnerabilities, this wouldn't have happened. You should consider reconciling eventually, she is your only child. These comments, usually well-intentioned, felt like minimizing what I'd experienced. As if abuse was somehow less serious when it came from family. As if I bore responsibility for my own victimization. As if maintaining a relationship was more important than my safety and well-being. I learned to set boundaries with those people too. To firmly but politely explain that what happened wasn't a family misunderstanding, but a series of crimes. That Vanessa had made choices to abuse and steal from me. And those choices had consequences, including the end of our relationship. That I wasn't required to forgive or reconcile with someone who'd tried to steal my freedom and dignity. Some people understood. Others drifted away, uncomfortable with my directness or unwilling to accept that not all family bonds were worth preserving. The financial recovery took time but was ultimately successful. Vanessa's restitution payments began once she was released from prison and found employment. I also filed civil suits to recover additional damages, and to clear my credit report of all the fraudulent accounts she'd opened. My insurance company eventually covered most of the losses from the identity theft once the criminal case concluded. Within 2 years, I was financially stable again, though I'd learned to be much more vigilant about monitoring my accounts and protecting my information. I also became involved in elder abuse prevention advocacy. I started speaking at senior centers and community organizations about warning signs of financial exploitation and family manipulation. I shared my story, not for sympathy but to help others recognize similar patterns before things escalated the way they had for me. The response was overwhelming. So many people came forward with their own experiences of being targeted by family members, of having their trust exploited, of feeling ashamed that they hadn't recognized the abuse sooner. Through this advocacy work, I met others who'd experienced similar situations. Support groups formed where survivors could share experiences and resources without judgment. We developed educational materials for seniors about protecting themselves from financial abuse. We lobbied for stronger laws and better enforcement of existing protections. Turning my trauma into activism gave me purpose and helped me feel like something good could come from what I'd endured. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from Vanessa. She'd been released from prison and was living in another state, working in retail and trying to rebuild her life. The letter was longer than her courtroom apology and seemed more genuine. She acknowledged specific things she'd done, described the therapy she'd received in prison, explained how she'd been forced to confront the harm she'd caused. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, just wanted me to know she understood now what she'd done and regretted it deeply. I read the letter multiple times, trying to determine if it was sincere or another manipulation. Dr. Matthews helped me work through my reaction, reminding me that I didn't owe Vanessa anything regardless of whether her remorse was genuine. Whether or not she'd changed didn't obligate me to welcome her back into my life. I could acknowledge her growth if real without sacrificing my own boundaries and healing. I eventually wrote back a brief response. I acknowledged receiving her letter and noted that I was glad she was getting help. I wished her well in rebuilding her life. But I also made clear that I wasn't interested in resuming a relationship, that too much damage had been done, that my peace and safety required maintaining distance. I told her the best thing she could do for me was to continue her restitution payments and to leave me alone. It wasn't cruel, but it was firm. And it felt right. Gerald's brother, my former brother-in-law Marcus, reached out during this time. He'd heard about everything through the family grapevine and was horrified. He apologized for not being more present in my life after Gerald died, for not noticing what Vanessa was doing. He started visiting regularly, and we rebuilt our connection. It was nice to have family who actually cared about my well-being, rather than seeing me as an asset to exploit. His wife Clara became a good friend, and their adult children treated me like the aunt I'd always been but hadn't felt like in years. On what would have been Gerald's 70th birthday, I visited his grave with flowers and spent time talking to him about everything that had happened. I told him about Vanessa's betrayal, about the trial, about my recovery. I told him I wished he'd been there to protect me, but also that I was proud I'd protected myself. I told him I was okay, that I was strong, that I was building a good life despite everything. And I felt at peace knowing he would have been proud of how I'd fought back. Life eventually found a new normal. I continued my advocacy work and my friendships. I traveled more, taking trips I'd always wanted to take but had postponed during the years of self-doubt Vanessa had created. I took up watercolor painting, joined a local theater group, volunteered at the library. I filled my days with activities I enjoyed and people who valued me. The house stopped feeling haunted by what had happened and started feeling like home again. I also updated my estate planning with Richard's help, ensuring that if anything happened to me, my assets would go to charities and organizations I cared about rather than to Vanessa. It was a practical decision but also a symbolic one. She tried to steal my legacy, and I wanted it documented clearly that she would receive nothing from me. My life's work and savings would benefit causes that mattered to me, not the person who tried to rob me of everything. Now at 75, I look back on those 18 months as a dark chapter but also a transformative one. I discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I learned that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. I found that community and connection could sustain me through crisis. I proved that age doesn't equal incompetence or vulnerability, that older adults can be strong advocates for themselves when given the support and resources to fight back. My message to others facing similar situations is simple but vital. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate rather than dismissing your concerns. Document everything. Maintain connections with friends and community, rather than allowing isolation. Seek professional help from attorneys, financial advisors, and therapists who specialize in elder issues. And remember that you deserve dignity, respect, and autonomy regardless of your age. What Vanessa tried to do to me almost worked. She came terrifyingly close to stealing my freedom, my assets, and my identity. But she failed because I fought back, because I had people who believed me, because the system eventually worked the way it was supposed to. Not everyone is that fortunate. Too many older adults lose their autonomy to conservatorship based on exaggerated or fabricated claims. Too many suffer financial abuse from family members without ever getting justice. That's why the work continues. The advocacy, the education, the pushing for better protections and more accountability. Because what happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone, but it happens far too often. Elder abuse is a hidden epidemic, occurring behind closed doors in families that appear normal from the outside. The victims often suffer in silence, too ashamed to admit what's happening or too isolated to seek help. My life now is peaceful, purposeful, and entirely my own. I make my own decisions, manage my own affairs, and spend my time exactly as I choose. The scars from Vanessa's abuse will always be there, but they don't define me. I'm not just a survivor of elder abuse. I'm an advocate, a friend, a community member, an artist, a traveler, and a woman who proved that strength and dignity don't diminish with age. Every morning I wake up in my house, in my own bed, with my own choices ahead of me. And every morning I'm grateful that I fought back, that I didn't let Vanessa's lies become my reality, that I reclaimed my life before it was too late. That's the real victory, not the courtroom judgment or the criminal conviction, but the simple fact that I'm still here, still independent, still myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.